Rocksteaserback is him, killing a Marine Admiral, destroying a Gates of Justice, abusing a big small child, and many more award-winning feats are now proudly on display, highlighting the sheer mediocrity of every character in the One Piece world who is not Rocksteaserback. So this chapter picks up pretty much exactly where we left off with Rocks and Loki, and Oda is wasting no time at all raising Rock's hype beyond all belief. I was pretty aghast when I saw this panel of Rocks preparing to strike because it is so unmistakably Roger-esque to be in this stance. In fact, it's almost an exact copy of Roger's stance when he clashed with Whitebeard in chapter 966. And seeing Rocks after the strike is extremely similar to Shanks' post-strike pose using Divine Departure, an attack that Shanks learned from Roger. I know that the narrator goes into some more specific details about the swordsmanship of Rocks, and we'll get to that next, but it is interesting that the narrator is telling us how unique his sword style was when everything we're seeing is something we've seen before. Also, they're not exactly the same, but Rocks and Roger appear to have a very similar swords, and altogether these factors almost make it feel like Rocks and Roger may have been trained by the same person or inspired by one another, or at least have a history that goes a lot further back than we have even begun to speculate on. As for the swordsmanship itself, mate, this warrants 2 narration boxes, but apparently, despite using sharp metal, the way that Rocks wielded a blade had a much more blunt force effect. He did not use his sword as the precise instrument that most blade masters pursue, and when Rocks takes a swing, there is no restraint, there's no artfulness, and really no attempt to do anything except to unleash the maximum amount of force possible. And I would love to see someone using this style in the modern day, just to see how the blunt force approach stacks up to someone like Zoro or even Mihawk. And I guess that being a swordsman was just the meta for this era, as if you look at Kaido's top 5 strongest characters, then what you've got is a Roger, a Rocks, an Odin, a Shanks, and a Whitebeard, with at least 4 of the 5 of them being swordsmen. You look at that and you go, oh, no wonder Mihawk is so bored. He grew up hearing about all of these wonderful sword-wielding legends, but by the time that he set out to sea, nobody wanted to play sword fights anymore. Just like Loki, Mihawk may have been born in the wrong generation, and just on Loki, let's not underestimate how important these first 2 pages are for him, because what may look like massive child abuse to us is actually a foundational moment for Loki. Loki is a man, I guess a child, so powerful that he can't even harm himself. He tried by jumping into the underworld and not a lot happened. So for Rocks to seriously injure Loki makes Rocks the first person that Loki has ever met who deserves his respect. And to jump around a bit, Rocks states that his ambition is to become a king of the world, to which Mr. Harold replies that, that is unreasonable, Mr. Roxa, because you are picking a fight with the entire planet, not good. But look at that statement from Loki's perspective. The way that he sees things, the entire planet had already picked a fight with him the day that he was born, to the point where Loki thought it was hopeless and he tried to remove himself from said planet. But in that moment, in comes a hero, Rocksteaserback, a man who vowed to take on the entire planet, showing Loki that the odds he was born with are not impossible to overcome. However, the pathway to doing so is to embrace destruction and to actively go against what his father Harold is working towards. And honestly, I get it. If you look at things purely from Loki's perspective, it really is incredibly difficult to see hope coming from anywhere or anyone other than Rocks. Although there is one little tiny glimmer elsewhere in this chapter, which is that Harold actually does return to Elbaf after hearing that Loki was injured. Loki dismisses it, but this is the first time that one of his parents have gone out of their way to care for him. And if we're looking at influence on Loki in terms of a percentage, then right now Rocks is at about 99% and Harold's influence on Loki is about 1%. And he earned that 1% by coming back when he heard his son was injured. And my thinking on this is that as the flashback goes on and or as our modern day Elbaf events play out, this ratio is going to become a lot more equal, and maybe even skew in Harold's favor if it hasn't already. And look, picking a fight with the entire planet isn't something exclusive to Mr. Rocksteaserback, as the Straw Hats have already done that to some extent by declaring war on the world government, so that could have some sway with Loki if and when he finds out, but admittedly it's not quite as thematically potent as what Rocks was planning. But also, another very important topic. So I often get asked the question, Internet man, why exactly is it that you own a pair of Sabo underwear? And personally, I think that asking why is nowhere near as strong of a question as asking how. As this is official One Piece underwear merchandise available only in Japan and practically impossible to get for Western swine like ourselves, because a lot of the merch websites are Japanese only, meaning that they're only in Japanese and that they only ship within Japan. However, we Westerners do have one amazing gateway into this world, and that would be Zen Market, the sponsor of this video, and a service that I've personally been using for a few years now to get the most obscure and amazing One Piece merch that you never even knew existed. Zen Market is a proxy shopping service. You go to their website, select the products you want from the Japanese-only providers, and Zen Market will then purchase them on your behalf. And once all of those items have arrived in their warehouse, you can create a parcel to send yourself overseas. I have a lot of really weird One Piece stuff, and the vast majority of it comes from Zen Market, such as my Eustace Captain Kidd bounty pillow, this magnificent Zoro statue, this videotape of the original Lost One Piece OVA, a ton of stuff from the One Piece card game, Dressrosa Monopoly, these 3 books which chronicle every single face that's ever been drawn in One Piece, and of course the prized Sabo underwear. And you would think that the main highlight of this is the front, but you'd be wrong, because for whatever reason when we turn it around, the back contains some Sabo stats, including his birthday and his devil fruit. All of that information could be gracing your posterior with Zen Market. You can find anything on Zen Market, not just One Piece related, but anime and even Japan in general. It's available in 19 languages with access to 10,000 Japanese stores, integrated with Japanese shopping platforms, with many shipping and payment methods for you to buy almost anything that your heart so desires. And not only that, but you can buy it shockingly cheaply. I was amazed at how much all of the stuff that now surrounds me did not cost. And if you click my link in the description and use the code GRANDLINEREVIEW, then you will be gifted 1,000 Zen points as a sign-up bonus, with 1 Zen point being the equivalent of 1 yen. So I cannot recommend Zen Market enough to any One Piece fan, which I assume is all of you watching. And as a man whose life has been consumed by fictional pirates, this is genuinely one of my favorite websites on the internet, and I am honored to be sponsored by them. So please do check it out, but for now it's back to you, me. Loki aside though, I think it's extremely difficult to read this chapter and not have more respect for Rox than almost any other character in the series, because we also see a flashback of the reverie where Rox met King Harold. And look, I was expecting chaos, but what I was not expecting was Rox to walk right up to Emu. This interaction, it's kind of messing with my head, because Rox makes it all the way to the flower room, which we're told is the first time that this has happened, as well as the last time that this will ever happen. So what we're seeing here, not even Luffy, the Straw Hats, or the Revolutionary Army are getting this far. Emu's going to be dealt with on the away court. But the thing that strikes me most about this scene is how weird it is for Emu to be present, but not be the commanding presence. Every time that Emu appears on page or on screen, he is the superior power. He is the one that every other character fears and respects, and the one that the readers are paying the most attention to. But when I see Rox staring him down in this room, even though Rox himself is not equipped to deal with Emu right now, he feels like the superior presence. He's the one that I'm glued to. And Emu, for the first time that I've personally experienced, feels like a side character. Especially when Rox looks Emu dead in the eyes and says that one day he'll be back, which I can't help but feel might be setting us up for a future confrontation with Emu and Blackbeard opening up with a line like, "I told you I'd be back." But it's a pretty incredible scene. Rox is a character who on paper has no control of the situation, and yet he still manages to take control. And this is why Loki looks up to him, because Rox is directly looking at the personification of the world, a being who can wield the overwhelming power of the planet, and Rox is still determined to bring him down. And you know what? It certainly inspires me to take a stand against the world government more so than anything that Dragon has done to date. And there are 2 more very important things about this section. The first is that we see Gunko, and it appears to be confirmed that she is Emu's mysterious assistant, who we've seen on a couple of occasions long before we met Gunko herself. Although I have to say the Gunko's face mask in assistant mode reminds me an awful lot of Ulti. So Gunko is not just a holy knight. She's a lot more special, or at the very least a lot more unique than that, because she is the person who serves Imu more directly than anyone else. And the point in time at which we're seeing her is 56 years ago, which is extremely relevant because Brook and the Rumbar Pirates, we're not exactly sure when they formed, but we do know that they arrived at Reverse Mountain 4 years after this reverie. So whatever happened with Gunko happened well before Brook and the Rumbar Pirates embarked on their journey. I don't know if we're going to get more of that in this flashback. I doubt it. But then again, I also doubted getting too much more of Rox as well, and look where that's left me. Right now we're on the verge of turning this into a backdoor Rox flashback. But the second important thing is a mention of Davy Jones, and I personally don't want to read too heavily into this line until we have the official translation, because I'm personally not 100% confident in the translation that we do have. But this is not the first mention of Davy Jones in the series, as he was brought up as the inspiration behind the Davy backfight on Long Ring Longland, and Oda even drew a little Davy Jones in the SBS of Volume 38. He's still a mythical figure as far as we know, but depending on the official translation of this line, we could go from mythical to more historical. But either way, Rox seems to have taken great inspiration from him, as we can tell because this chapter confirms a long-standing theory about the Rox Pirates, which is that all of them were gathered in Davy backfights, which is the only way that you could assemble such a crazy crew of people who all hate one another, and we're even shown some of it in this chapter. And if you do look carefully at the Davy backfight section, you should be able to recognize at least 2 of the games they're playing. Rox is first shown engaging in what appears to be the donut race, or a variant of boat race, which the Straw Hats did in round 1, and Rox also did the boxing combat that Luffy engaged in with Foxy. There's also a third game being played that I don't recognize, but I'm sure that one of you brilliant people in the comments will. However, it's not all about games, because there's also a common purpose that unites the Rox members at this early stage in their journey. And on that, we are treated to a sweet morsel of history of Hachinosu, which I must say is very similar to the origin story of Australia. It was a penal colony where pirates and other ne'er-do-wells were dumped to starve to death that formed their own society thanks to an unexpected mining discovery, which gives us a pretty compelling reason as to why Whitebeard wanted to stay with Rox, not just for the sake of pirate game honor, but because he wanted his share of that sweet, sweet Hachinosu gold to send back to his village. Meanwhile, Buckingham Stussy probably wants her share to fund future science activities. Shiki wants it for more traditional reasons, greed, haha. And then we have 3 new-ish Rox Pirates members to introduce. The first of which is Ganzui, a smuggler, and this is why I say new-ish, because if you've got some sweet sharp eyes, then you've seen Ganzui before, as he is actually zombie 889 on Thriller Bark, one of the zombie generals standing beside Captain John, another Rox pirate, and I'm pretty convinced that most of the zombie generals are former Rox members as well. I believe we also saw a close-up of Ganzui during the God Valley incident in Kuma's flashback, so it is great to finally know who this dude is. However, there is also a complete wild card in this group, and that would be Don Marlon, who is almost certainly a reference to Marlon Brando playing Vito Corleone in The Godfather, a movie that everyone knows even if they haven't seen it. And this dude is a gangster from West Blue, which immediately draws comparison to Capone Gang Beige, who is also a classical gangster from West Blue, and may well be related to Don Marlon, although there were said to be 5 mafia families that controlled West Blue, so Beige could be from a rival family. I don't know though, you gotta think that it's more likely that he's related to the big guy here, just so we can really oomph up those Worst Generation members with some Roxian lineage. And I'm not unconvinced that we may have another relative in this group as well. The biggest surprise to me was finally showing us Ochoku, also translated as Wang Zi, who looks a pretty insane amount like Caribou and his brother Korobu. And it's not just the tongue, it is the everything, which would actually be a bit of a trippy connection, because Ochoku is the person who goes on to take control of Hachinosu, and also the one to be defeated by Blackbeard during the time skip. Very relevant considering that Caribou is a Bartolomeo level of fanboy of Mr. Blackbeard, so maybe Caribou didn't have a good relationship with Ochoku, or maybe they look alike by sheer coincidence. Either way, I'm really happy to have Ochoku finally revealed, and as of right now, I think the only Rox pirate we know of but still haven't seen is his silver axe. But keeping with all this relatives business for a second, the more I see of Rox, the more he is giving me Eustace Kid vibe. Not just in terms of design, but also a lot of that, but more so in terms of personality. Because I think Rox is what Kid thinks he is in his mind. Rox is like what would happen if everything that Kid said he would do is actually what he could do. And if Oda were to give Rox red hair, then I might start to take that a bit more seriously. But for now, something that I absolutely cannot ignore is that we get to see Rox's bounty poster, and mate, shit on a stick does it look like a mirrored version of Buggy's current bounty as an Emperor of the Sea. Right now, the whole Buggy is the son of Rox theory exists somewhere between crack and compelling, but this poster has moved the idea significantly more onto the compelling side of that spectrum. Remembering that Oda, he didn't have to do this. He's done it on purpose to draw the comparison to Buggy, and maybe it is just a red herring, but it's one that I cannot ignore. Nor can I ignore the phenomenal clash between Rox and King Harold at the Reverie, and the way it's drawn, you can see that they're not actually blade touching. They are projecting their hakis, just like Roger and Whitebeard did, with the Conqueror's lightning and everything, and it's bordering on sky splitting, but it's an attack that was felt across a 5-kilometer radius. And I know that that means something to half of you watching, but for the other half, some context as to how big 5 kilometers is would be that it's about half the height of the red line from sea level. Not below sea level because it extends another 10 kilometers down to the sea floor, but 5 kilometers is an awfully long way for the ripple effects of a single clash to reach. And just before moving on with Rox and Harold, one of the most insane things I think I've ever heard was said but not shown in this chapter, which is that allegedly Rox, all on his own, destroyed one of the gates of justice. And if you don't remember what the gates of justice are, they are these impossibly colossal sea doors that seal off the tub current. And one does not simply destroy a gate of justice. There are maybe a handful of people in the world who could pull that off. I'm thinking maybe Sakazuki if he went full destruction mode, or perhaps either Whitebeard or Blackbeard with the Guruguru no Mi, but to anyone without a naturally apocalyptic ability, this idea is completely off the table, or so I thought. The fact that Rox did this is more impressive than defeating an admiral, at least to me, and it is wild that Oda didn't show us any of it. But what he did show us was Rox and Harold, which are a very thematically interesting combination, because you've got this giant with the DNA of bloodthirsty warriors actively pursuing a path of peace and diplomacy, clashing against a human who is pursuing the style of conquest and barbarism that is theoretically native to King Harold. And even the way that Rox uses his sword, it feels like he'd be more at home using a mace, a hammer, an axe, or another more classically giant weapon. So Rox is kind of like the devil on Harold's shoulder, tempting him to embrace that nature, and he could quite literally do that due to the size differential. But there's a line in this chapter during the dinner where Rox said that people never change, and that bloodlust that Harold is trying to avoid, it is still within you, do not deny it. It's there, I, Rockman, can see it. And I do feel like this is a bit of foreshadowing for what's to come, as there is an event in this flashback that will explain why Harold ripped off his horns, and if he was put in a situation where Rox's words did come to fruition, and that bloodlust takes command of Harold, then that's how I could see him coming to that complete state of rejection, as well as desperation to rid himself of his inherited bloodlust. And so there's a pretty big and pretty not so fun question mark about how Harold's story is going to end, because even after the horns have gone, it seems that we have one of two options for the day of his death. Either Rox's words will continue to reign true and Harold will give in to violence, or Harold will completely reject that violence, and maybe that's how he ends up skewered by his guards for whatever reason, just because he didn't fight back. Although there is also a third option, probably fourth and fifth as well, but a third option, which is that Harold was controlled to do bad things similar to a dummy reversey style technique. But that is the path that I'm hoping we don't go down, because whichever way we do head, I would love for Harold to retain his agency. And we are rather blitzing through the history of the Rox Pirates at this rate, so I do think the focus is going to switch much more firmly back to Harold, if not the next chapter than the one after, because timeline-wise, we're now only 5 years away from the God Valley incident. So I'd probably expect word of what happened to reach Albarth in the next chapter, and that may be the biggest emotional blow to Loki to date. To know that the one person he believed in was defeated by the planet, but as we know, that only inspires Loki to get out there and carry on that legacy. But for now, we continue this flashback in a space that again makes me a little bit nervous, because I'm not confident which way things are gonna go for Harold. And all I know is that either way, it's not good and it's gonna hurt.